Welcome to Muse News, the show where we talk about all things memorial and beyond. I'm your host, John Harris. Today we have a very special guest. We have Eddie Sheerr. He was the chief meteorologist for NTV News, and now he's starting a new app called Sheerr Weather. Here to tell us all about it is Sheerr himself. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. So tell us about your meteorology story. You grew up in Pennsylvania, and you had that first experience on a trip to Florida during Hurricane Andrew. Can you tell us about that?
So, going back to even before Andrew, right, I was always, interested in weather in some way, shape, or form. I remember, some of the first videos I recall watching were, National Geographic tapes, legit tapes, with, tornadoes and lightning and kind of things like that. My kids watched Bluey. I guess I was watching, that kind of stuff. Something that solidified, I think, my kind of obsession for weather was I was 8, and we went down to Florida to see my grandparents. My mom took my brother and I to Florida to see my grandparents in August of 1992. And I remember getting down to Florida, and my grandmother said there's a hurricane watch. And I didn't know what that meant, but I knew it wasn't probably very good. And so over the subsequent days, Hurricane Andrew was tracked, and it looked like it was going to make landfall in Florida. So we had to evacuate to an inland location because they had a condo kind of right on the beach. If you've ever seen the footage from Hurricane Andrew, parts of Miami-Dade County, which is South Florida, were decimated by this storm. It was, I think, up until Katrina, it was, I think, one of the only Category 5 hurricanes to make landfall in the United States. And the winds were sustained at about 160 miles per hour. Forgive me, I can't do that conversion to metric. I think it's 240 or 50 kilometers an hour, roughly. Very high in the higher gusts, and things in Miami were just decimated. Florida actually changed, I think, their whole building code after Andrew to kind of make sure it doesn't happen again. When we were further north, so it wasn't so bad where we were, because as I came to find out with hurricanes, the strongest winds are generally over a pretty small area. So we were, probably 100 kilometers north, and we did have hurricane force winds, but it wasn't like what they saw with Andrew. But I remember being in this hotel room, and there was a big, plate glass window, and it was just all night was just being sucked in and out by the wind. It was boom, 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 boom. And I was terrified. I was only 8 years old. But it's a core memory. And the hurricane, passed, and everything was all right, luckily for us. But, that really kind of got me interested in weather. And then after that, it was the blizzard of 96, which hit outside of Philadelphia. And that was, which is where I grew up. And we had 3 feet of snow, about 100 centimeters of snow, in about a day. Not much different than Snowmageddon here, but it wasn't as windy. And I recall walking around being waist deep in snow, and I was hoping every winter we'd have one like that. And I didn't really see it again until Snowmageddon. But those kind of two things I think really solidified my obsession for weather. And then as I got through high school, that kind of turned into okay, I want to follow this and be a meteorologist, and I also want to talk about weather, so I want to be on TV. And so I went to university in New Hampshire, Plymouth State University, got a Bachelor of Science degree in meteorology.
And a math minor.
A technical mathematics minor. Yeah, good research. I'm terrible at math. And as it turns out, meteorology is a lot of math. So to get a MET degree, in Canada it might vary a little bit because the programs are different. But you got to go through basically physics 1 and 2, and calculus 1, 2, and 3, and statistics and thermodynamics and dynamic meteorology 1 and 2, and all these things are calculus based and require a vast knowledge of calculus. Turns out I understood calculus enough to get through it, but I had a real good memory to kind of remember how to derive the formulas and whatnot, so I got through that with the intent of really not using it in that way. Right? There are meteorologists that will use the math to make computer models and use it in the private sector. We're broadcast meteorologists. You have to know the fundamentals, but you don't really use the math on a day-to-day basis. And so I got my degree, and I started in Macon, Georgia, in 2007 at WGXA. It was a Fox affiliate. And then I was there for 2 years. And then moved out to Grand Junction, Colorado, which was an ABC affiliate called KJCT. And I was there, I think, for 4 years. And then that took me to 2013 when I moved up to St. John's to start at NTV.
So meteorologists play a really key role in keeping people safe during weather disasters. How do you feel that responsibility when it comes to, say, big hurricanes that have come through here? And tell us about what that experience is like to feel almost responsible for keeping everyone safe.
Yeah, I mean, so that's something I do take, really seriously. Is weather is not dangerous a lot of the time in Newfoundland and Labrador. Like my father-in-law says, we get a lot of bad weather, we don't get a lot of severe weather, and that's generally true. But every once in a while, we do get severe weather, and we had Hurricane Larry, Hurricane Fiona, and Snowmageddon, and those are three that kind of live in my head as a highlight reel that really did provide life-threatening weather to the province. And when I'm looking at the charts ahead of a system like that, it's the whole vibe, I suppose, is different, right? It's not like I'm forecasting 20 degrees. It's like when it came to Fiona, it was like, okay, there's going to be a bad storm surge. Where is it going to be bad, and how bad is it going to be? And is the community really prepared for what at least I think is going to happen? And those are questions I ask myself, all the time when it comes to severe weather. And so when that happens, we are going to see impending weather that can be life-threatening. I do take it very seriously, and I want to try and let people know what the biggest threats are. Is it wind? Is it water? Is it snowfall rates that are going to be exceptionally high, where you could end up being stuck on a highway or stuck on a city road if you're out the wrong time of the storm? And that, I think, is going to be more of the role of the meteorologist as we kind of work into now and in the next few years, as forecasting gets more, I don't want to say taken over by AI, but really I don't need to tell you it's going to be 25 degrees today with a humidex of 28. Right? Your app is going to do a great job of that. My app's going to do a great job of that. But apps don't do a great job of telling you when the weather is going to be dangerous, when the snow is going to come in, when it's going to change to ice pellets and freezing rain, what the highest wind speeds are going to be, where the storm surge is going to be if we're seeing a real strong storm, what the most dangerous facets are of weather. There's a lot of weather that can be dangerous and needs to be talked about in a way that makes sense and is conveyed in a way that doesn't sound like you're crying wolf. And so that's what I've tried to do with NTV, and what I will try to do with my platform, Sheerr Weather, as we get going.
And so the lead up to Snowmageddon, you're in the store buying a generator. What was going through your head?
Very rarely have I looked at a meteorological chart and thought, this is bad. This could be very bad, particularly in the winter. And the thing about Snowmageddon is, so when you're doing winter forecasting, you can look at a computer model almost any given day, and 10, 14 days out, which is not a reliable forecast, there's always some huge storm. And 99 times out of 100, it doesn't happen. Snowmageddon was 7 or 8 days out, and the computer model started kind of locking in on this, and I was like, that's interesting. And then every subsequent day was looking more and more and more likely. And so I'm looking at all this snow, and it's 60 centimeters, 70 centimeters, 80 centimeters. And then I started looking at the wind speeds, and it's computer models that don't typically show high wind speeds. The Canadian global model typically does not show high wind speeds over eastern overland that much. And I'm looking at that, and it's showing sustained winds of 120 kilometers an hour for hours. And I'm looking at the European computer model, showing the same thing. And then the high-res gem model, which is called the RGEM, regional gem model, looking at the same thing. And I'm okay, this is going to be quite a winter storm. And so actually I called my wife, I think 2 days before, and we had my daughter was 6 months old at the time. My oldest was 6 months old at the time. And I was like, Susan, we might want to have your parents come in for this. It looks pretty bad. She's like, no, it's not going to be that bad. We'll be fine. And I was like, yeah, you're probably right. And I looked at it more, and I was like, we can't, I'm looking at the winds and the snow. I'm there's a good chance we're going to lose power here. So I was like, we can't lose power. I might not be home. We need stuff for the baby. I was like, so I'll go buy a generator. So I went and bought a generator. I think it was the night before I went on the news saying we were going to get 100 centimeters of snow or close to it. And when people saw me, I think buying a generator, they knew it was not probably going to be a good situation. So when the meteorologist is a little bit alarmed, that's cause for concern.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so you talk about this idea of not wanting to cry wolf. Have there been any situations where you may have thought something was coming and it hasn't? And what was that experience like?
That does happen in Newfoundland generally fairly frequently. And I don't want to say the forecast is wrong frequently, although that may be the perception. But there's a lot of times where, especially on the Avalon, we're kind of like on the boundary of like, are we going to get, 10 centimeters of snow and rain, or is it going to be 30 centimeters of snow because it's all snow? And, a lot of times, like, you have to pick, what do I think is going to happen based on what I'm looking at? And, you say, okay, we're going to get 10 centimeters and it's going to go to rain. Well, sometimes you get 3. And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes you don't get the rain and you get 25 centimeters of snow. But those systems are rarely, like, even if the forecast is off, either one of those ways, it's not super impactful, right? Like, yes, maybe we get 20, maybe we get 5. If the forecast was for 10, like, stuff's probably not closing down. If it was, it's probably for half the day. And at the end of the day, like, I'm not the only one looking at the information, right? So, like, Environment Canada probably had a similar forecast, and, the CBC probably had a similar forecast, and every other outlet probably had a similar forecast to myself. But occasionally, like, we do vary a little bit. Every meteorologist will interpret the data a little bit differently. But there was one that does stand out. I think it was in April of 2016 or 17. I can't remember. It was an April Fool's storm, and there was this huge low offshore. Like, I can remember looking at the data. Huge. And sometimes in the spring, we get these. It's cold enough that if these lows get close enough, we will get a fair bit of snow. But it looked like the low was going to back in, just brush the Avalon with 10, 15 centimeters of snow, and then move away. And there was the potential for it to be more, but unfortunately, when storms are spinning out in the North Atlantic, there's not a lot of good weather data that the computer guidance gets. So you're kind of flying blind a little bit, if you will. And I think the winds were forecast to be about 80 or 90 kilometers per hour. I woke up that morning, and the snow wasn't supposed to start, I think, until midday, and this was 6, and it had started already, and the winds were gusting over 100. So I was a bit perplexed by this. And I think I went on the news the night before and said, all right, I've looked at it, I think we're going to get 15 centimeters, and that's going to be it. We got 50.
Wow.
So
April Fools,
right? Like, it happens every once in a while where you get a system like that. And so really, crying wolf is something, is more like try not to be clickbaity, right? Like, not every storm is worth a huge headline or worth getting super excited about. But there are some that are. But I also like to be, realistic. And, this is what I'm thinking. This could happen. This also could happen. Trying to convey uncertainty in a forecast is extremely challenging. And that's, maybe a tangent to what the original question was. But every forecast has a certain amount of uncertainty with it, especially in this part of the world. And the issue is, it's really hard to convey uncertainty to a big audience who may not want to hear uncertainty, right? Everybody wants, what do you think is going to happen? Well, it's like, okay, this is what I think is going to happen, but the envelope is, a bit wider than that. And so what ultimately ends up happening is I go with X, and we might get X minus 5 or X plus 5. And, the public is like, you were wrong, you didn't get it right. It's like, well, I mentioned this was in the envelope of possibilities, and very rarely are, in these days, with how good weather computers are getting, are we outside the envelope? It's just communicating the envelope is the challenging part.
So when you interned in Philadelphia with Glenn Hurricane Schwartz and Doug Kammerer,
you got it. Yeah.
What was that experience like? And are you still in touch with those guys? And what was that mentorship like?
I speak to Doug, I'll say regularly, but fairly frequently. And he was a good, very, very good mentor for me, and a very good person to kind of bounce things off of, and get advice from. As I was kind of, meandering my way through my career. But it was really interesting at the time to see, what a news operation was like in a really big market. Because when you compare, even Toronto, which is, I think, the biggest city in Canada, to, Philly or New York, they're kind of on par. But how news is done in the U.S. is very, very different from how it's done in Canada. Right, in Canada, you have basically very few independent operators of news stations, and TV is one of the last. but you have a lot of, your CTV, Global, CBC, and they own bureaus like all over the country, pretty well a monopoly between the three of them. In the U.S., you have some big companies that own a lot of television stations, but in each city, you'll have like 3 different stations, right? You have CBS, ABC, NBC, and Fox, and each one of them has their own newscast. And obviously, they're competing for views, and there's a lot of money that goes into that. And so when you're in a place like Philly and you're going to, CBS or NBC, like these are huge news operations, like big buildings downtown, huge, like 10,000 square foot studios, multi-million-dollar sets. And it was interesting kind of being in that environment and really seeing how, almost it's like a show, and how good those meteorologists were at performing and conveying, weather information, in front of a camera and a green screen. You watch somebody do it. And when I interned, I went in and I watched, I think it might have been Doug or Glenn stand in front of the green screen and talk. I was like, that looks so easy. And then you get up there and like the lights are on you and the camera's on you and you get real sweaty. And, the thing about weather is it's all ad-libbed, right? Like much like I'm talking to you right now, weather's ad-libbed. So there's no script to follow.
Wow.
So when you're in front of the green screen, right? You're in front of the green screen, all you've got is your show, which are the weather graphics and the weather computer that you can see in front of you and on the sides. Hopefully you can remember the order of your slides, which is like, a lot of these weather systems are like PowerPoint, but on like, steroids essentially, and the camera. And so you have to be entertaining, informative, you have to move around a lot, and you're doing it all in your head all at the same time. And so it is extremely challenging, and I've been at it now for like 17 years, and I still don't think I'm that good at it, but I'm a lot better than I used to be.
So you've been in several different markets: Georgia, New Hampshire, Philadelphia in your internship, Colorado, and then finally Newfoundland. What has been different between the weather and reporting on the weather in each of these different climates?
So, when you compare like Western Colorado and, Philadelphia to like St. John's or even New Hampshire, they all have kind of various amounts of the same weather, right? They all, Colorado, we got winter weather, although I lived down in a valley, and so we didn't get a lot of snow, but occasionally it did snow. The mountains would get a ton of snow, obviously. Philly, again, outside of Philadelphia, winter is winter. It might snow, but then it's going to be 10 degrees, a couple days later, and you get your cold snaps, but they don't last. New Hampshire's probably the most similar because it would get cold in the winter, it would snow a reasonable amount, but not as much. Probably similar to actually St. John's, but I don't think the weather was as extreme. But when it comes to like Newfoundland, like the weather here is very unique because, like, it's frequent. Like the weather frequency in the winter here is almost maddening sometimes because you can be having one system depart, another one's already moving in, and so it's hard to kind of sometimes parse them out a little bit because you might have like one storm that had a warning, next one comes in 12 hours later, get a warning for that, while the warning for the other one is still in place, so it gets complicated to kind of parse it all out sometimes. But it's the frequency and the intensity. The intensity of winter storms in Newfoundland is pretty well unmatched, I would say, anywhere in like the eastern side of North America, and probably outside of the mountains, probably unmatched almost anywhere in North America. We get some ferocious winter storms up here, and it's not like they happen infrequently. They happen all the time. It's just like, is it West Coast, is it Central, is it Eastern, is it Labrador? And so kind of knowing like how the winter storm is going to affect the area, what is important for the area to know with respect to winter storms and how much is a lot for a specific area. Like, we're talking about snow, like let's talk about St. John's and Corner Brook, right? St. John's, we get 30 or 40 centimeters of snow at a time, and that's significant for the city, right? That's we do get that much snow, but we don't get like those systems like, more than a few times a year, right? So that's something to be cognizant of. The West Coast, 15, 20 centimeters of snow, if it's coming like from a storm, it's, normal, run of the mill. I'm not going to make a big deal of it, right? People on the West Coast always say, you don't make a big deal of the snow. And it's like, but you're always saying how much more snow there is in the West Coast than St. John. So it's like you can't, on one hand, say, like, we want you to make a big deal of it, but on the other hand, go, well, snow's here all the time, right? And so, you have to kind of be aware of the area that's receiving the weather. But when it comes to, like, just the various types of weather, so in the winter here you can get freezing drizzle. In very few places in North America can you get wind off the ocean that results in freezing precipitation, right? Eastern Newfoundland, northeastern Newfoundland's probably like the only spot in Labrador. And so you get freezing drizzle in the winter, which can be very disruptive because it's very slippery. And drizzle is like it accretes very efficiently. You get snow, and you get wind, you get rain, you get freezing rain, which can be significant too in some areas. And that's happening a little more now in northern peninsula and Labrador than I think it has in the past. And then on the west coast and even southern areas, you get really, really intense snow squalls. And those are probably the most intense things that the west coast gets in the run of winter, are these really small, narrow bands of intense snowfall. So, just keeping track of what's going on across the province in any given day in the winter can be very, very challenging. And very rarely, was I dealing with all those facets at the same time in Colorado or, in Georgia.
So take us back to 2013. Your contract is ending in Colorado, and you get a call to come up to Newfoundland. What was that experience like?
Oh, I'd say jokingly to my friends, it's like I was catfished. Because I was looking for work, and I got a phone call from a buddy of mine who was working in university. And if it wasn't for his call, I wouldn't even be here today. So his name is Ted Zaris. Ted, if you're watching this, man, thank you so much for that call. Changed the whole trajectory of my life. And he calls me, and he's like, have you ever heard of this place called Newfoundland? And I was like, yes. You ever heard of St. John's? I was like, no. He's like, well, there's a television station here. They're called NTV. They're looking for a meteorologist. Are you interested? And I was like, maybe. I was like, if can they fly me up so I can see the place and get a feel of it? Because I was in Canada a few times, but never in Atlantic Canada. And he was like, yep. So I came up here. I think it was middle of May, and my goodness, was it beautiful! It was 20 odd degrees. They took me to Signal Hill, out to Cape Spear, all around the city. I was like, this place is stunning. And even now, I love Newfoundland. It's so pretty. The scenery here is striking. And I interviewed over at NTV, and I was like, you know what? I don't know if this is for me or not, but I was just out of a long-term relationship, and I was like, I'll try it. And so I agreed to I took the job, and I came back here I think in June to look for a place to live, and again, weather was gorgeous. And then I moved up here in I think it was August of 13, and it was nice as we started, end of the summer, went into fall, and that winter was very snowy. And I was kind of welcome to trial by fire, getting used to Newfoundland and Labrador winter, which is, it's unlike anything I've ever experienced. When we're in a snowy period, it snows a lot, and it can snow a lot, and it just keeps snowing. And the other thing is it's always cold here. Where I grew up, you get a bit of fluctuation, but once we're into November, December, it's very rarely above freezing until March or April. So that was kind of my welcoming to Newfoundland, Labrador.
In my experience, when summer rolls around in Newfoundland, you kind of remember why you chose to live here.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the summers here. We started camping when my oldest daughter was 2.5, 3, and we've seen so much of the island, and it's just Newfoundland, when it's nice, it's so nice, and there's so many beautiful communities all around the island that I really would love people to see more of. Right? There's just so much. There's so many spots that are gorgeous.
So let's get into the Sheerr weather app.
Sure.
What made you want to start an app for weather, and is it reflecting a changing way that the weather will be delivered going forward in the future?
So it'll be more than an app. An app is just part of the platform that I've been working on. So the app is going to be called Sheerr Weather, but the platform is also Sheerr Weather, which is going to be a website with I think some pages that hopefully folks will find quite useful. One of which is going to be a map room where you can get the latest observed temperatures across the province, wind speeds, all the stuff people are interested in, and I can kind of pick and choose what's there based on requests. Webcams are going to be there, provincial webcams as well. The 511NL has a lot of webcams, so I've got those. And that's going to be on the website, and possibly I'll get those into the app. But in my opinion, and I say this reflecting on a lovely career with NTV, people's habits on how they're consuming media, all media, news, weather, sports, whatever, have changed significantly in the last 10 to 12 years or so. When I started, it was still kind of very much traditional, And now, I think we are getting away from that, and everything, they would say is like the TikTokification of everything, where it's like everything's kind of shorter form or produced a little bit differently, but the need for the same content is still there. You just have to kind of meet the kind of end user where they are and how they want to kind of consume it based on the trends. And so the goal of Sheerr Weather is to kind of meld all of that kind of almost into one, where I want to provide the forecast for the province because that's what I really love doing, and I want to help keep people safe during severe weather events, and that'll be done with push notifications through the app, blog posts, live streaming, all of the things that content creators are utilizing in 2025 to reach people. But it's also putting out weather content that I think more people will consume on the various platforms. Right, and so this gets into something I've learned a lot about in the last couple of years, is like what you call platforming culture. And like, I don't think behavior for people is to kind of go seeking out content necessarily, because right now, like yourself, right, you'll open up Facebook or TikTok or Instagram and you're kind of served up what you think's interesting based on the algorithm. And if Newfoundlanders and Labradorians think the weather's interesting, well, they're going to get served up, hopefully, my content. And so that's kind of the goal of the platform, is to meet people where they are, but tailor the content on a per platform basis. So what works on, as a Facebook post probably isn't going to work as a reel. What works on YouTube, probably not going to work on Facebook. What works on YouTube, certainly not going to work on TikTok, right? So when you're trying to reach like a wider audience, you kind of need to think about these things from a very strategic standpoint. And that's kind of where I'm trying to steer Sheerr Weather, is to really try and broaden out, the people who are consuming weather information and getting the weather information and getting it when it's important, because that is really the why of what I want to do, is I want more people to not be so surprised by the weather.
And do you think that the Sheerr Weather app and network, the digital network, will that be able to be expanded across Canada or into other jurisdictions as well, or is it mostly Newfoundland Labrador focused for now?
So to start, it's hyper-local Newfoundland Labrador, as hyper-local as I can be for Newfoundland Labrador. I mean, obviously we have a very big province and there's only one of me, and I have a pretty good handle on like what weather patterns bring what weather to most areas. But I'll still face some of the same challenges I had, when you're on when I was on with NTV, is, people aren't going to sit through an hour forecast, so you have to try and narrow it down in some capacity. And you're not going to be right for every single area all the time. It's impossible. But you can give out the general gist of the forecast pretty easily. But yeah, I mean, the hope is to potentially expand, and grow into different markets. Atlantic Canada as a whole, is probably, has that information gap as well, in my opinion. And the country may as well. I mean, when you look at weather providers across the country, there's only one. It's the Weather Network. That's the only national weather provider that currently exists in Canada. There are some smaller entities that exist across the country, but that's really it. When you look down into the U.S., there's multiple, right? You have the Weather Channel, you've got Fox Weather, you've got Weather Nation, right? There's a few. And so is my vision to maybe get that big? I don't know. But I know there's room for weather content information to be, better disseminated to a broader audience across the country, in my mind.
So NTV recently launched a weather app. Do you think that they're going to be competing in that space, or is what they're doing a little bit different?
I mean, if they did launch the weather app, and full disclosure, it's pretty much it was built on the same platform as mine, right? And I wish them best of luck with however they want to move forward. I don't know what the strategy is that they're trying to employ. I mean, obviously they want to reach people where they are with the app, and it's something that was discussed several years ago when I was there, but it's not something that happened when I was under my watch there, unfortunately. And I mean, I suppose yes, there is probably going to be some crossover, some competition there, but at the end of the day, my app, it's my branding, and I get to control what's in it, and I get to communicate through it how I want to communicate through it. And if people want the app, it's because they want my information. And that is what's going to differentiate the two, right? Like, what's behind my app is me.
And weather and meteorology is a very personality-based kind of industry. How is your personality and your trust that you built with an audience going to continue through with the Sheerr network and app?
I think as long as I don't cry wolf, you know, and don't sensationalize things and just be my true, authentic self, you know, as much as you can be whenever you're in front of a camera, you know, you put it on a little bit. You have to. But I try and be as close to myself as possible on camera. And, you know, that's something that even when I began my career with NTV was a goal of mine. And the only way to do that is to be in front of a camera a lot. And, you know, I think that's part of the reason that, you know, both NTV and myself became so successful. Let me rephrase that. I think that's the reason the NTV weather brand and became so successful, and my name became so widely known across the province. Not trying to sound egotistical.
No, but did you expect that going into taking this job in Newfoundland and Labrador, that your name would be so big and that your personality would be kind of a popular household name throughout the province in the way that it's kind of become?
I was yes and no. So it was explained to me that weather here is a very big deal. And that, you know, if I'm good, if I do a good job, that, you know, that might, something like that may happen, but I don't think it was, you know, I don't think anyone could have foreseen that, but that's a formula, right? And so, you know, NTV had the platform, and then there was me, and it was like, what do I want to do? Like, how do I want to operate? And I operated under the pretenses of like, I want to be as good as I can on NTV, and B, I want to go above and beyond. And so that was doing, you know, YouTube Lives back in 2013 and being on Twitter when it was myself and Ryan Snodden and, you know, and a lot of the other NLWX gang, which, you know, has since kind of quieted down a little bit. And being on the socials when it wasn't necessary, right? Early in the morning, late in the evening, 2 in the morning when it came to Hurricane Larry coming through. And all of that really helped build, you know, the weather brand of NTV, and my name as well, being synonymous with NTV through those years. And that was kind of one of the goals I had, was like, I wanted to be the source that people came to for weather, because that was going to benefit all boats, right? You know, a rising tide floats all boats, as they say. So that was kind of strategic on my part, but like how long I was going to do that for, there was no timeline in my mind. I almost left in 2015 before I met my wife. And so that would have been that, but I didn't. So I'm still here, obviously. Before I met my wife, I almost left, I should say. But, you know, to the end of the popularity, like, I don't think so. When I first started here, like, NTV and CBC were pretty well, like, dead even in the ratings, from what I understand. And now NTV is number one, and it's number one by quite a ways when we had our last ratings. I say when they had their last ratings, still fresh, and that was probably pre-COVID times. But, you know, when you can't go anywhere and you get recognized, I mean, people are watching, right? And people still watch, and people are still going to watch NTV. And I don't want to take anything away from that, right? Like, I think this is very much it's not an either or. For some it may be, but in my mind it's an and, right? I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and people are still going to watch the news, and they're going to watch Ryan, and Ryan is wonderful. Great person, and he's going to do great, right? I have nothing but, you know, good things to say about, you know, NTV. It was a wonderful place to work. But in my mind, it's an either. It's not an either or. It's an and. But I also think there's a gap between the demographic that is watching the news and, you know, people who are not watching the news, and that is more or less, you know, I'd like to target everybody, obviously, but my kind of goal is to, you know, really engage with people who you know, like what they see on content-wise, and then try and reach a bit of a younger audience who is probably not getting the information that they need to get.
And so going forward, do you plan to stay here in Newfoundland and Labrador, and what's behind that decision? Yeah,
I mean, I have no intent to move. You know, I know a lot in the past when whether people leave. When I left my other jobs, you know, you move away. But no, like my wife is from Bishop's Falls. You know, my kids are Newfoundlanders. in Labradorians. I suppose I'm an adopted one by now. But no, I mean, I truly, genuinely, the spring is sometimes hard to say this without getting a little bit nauseous, but I love Newfoundland and Labrador. Like, I love this province, and this is what I consider home. I have no intent on moving. Starting my own business like this will give me a little more flexibility to visit family, which is in the States, and things like that. But no, I have no intent to move, and just stay put, and hopefully this business venture works out. Right.
Well, thank you so much, Eddie. I really appreciate you coming on the show, and it's been a pleasure catching up with you.
Thanks.